At my sister's wedding, they seated me by the kitchen, then the royal guest arrived. I'm Isabella Carter. I'm 31 years old. I work as a senior diplomatic liaison in Washington, D.C. My life is usually about precision and very high stakes, but even with all that, my family still managed to make me feel small. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? They sat me at table 18. It was right next to the kitchen doors. I could hear every clatter, every dish being stacked, every whispered instruction from the catering staff. It was loud. It was busy, and it was where they put me. My sister's wedding was a big deal, a really big deal. The ballroom was huge. It was full of gold chandeliers that glittered with 1,000 tiny lights. There were important people everywhere, politicians, socialites, rich people I only ever saw in magazines. My sister Emma was at the head table. She looked like a princess, like a queen even. Her dress was white, huge, and sparkling. Her new husband, Richard, looked like he belonged in a fancy magazine. His family had old money, old power, old names. Everything about it screamed important, and I was hidden. They put me behind a tall floral screen. It was meant to be pretty, I guess, but all it did was make me feel more invisible, like an afterthought. My view of Emma was mostly blocked. I could only see parts of her sometimes, when she moved, when someone shifted. I got a clearer view of the kitchen staff entrance than I did of my own sister getting married. Emma had called me a few weeks before. She was going over the seating chart. Her voice was always a little high-pitched when she was stressed, or when she was pretending not to be stressed. Isabella, she'd said, a fake sweetness in her voice, we're just having a little trouble fitting everyone. You know how it is. So many important people. I listened. I always listened. We've put you at table 18. It's a nice table, very cozy. Cozy, that's what she called it. It's just logistics, Isabella. She'd added quickly before I could say anything. You know, traffic flow, proximity to the restrooms, just practical stuff. But I knew better. I always knew better when it came to Emma. And when it came to my family, this wasn't about logistics. This wasn't about traffic flow. This was about punishment. It was a clear message, a quiet one, but loud enough for me to hear. It was punishment for not fitting into her world, for not being glamorous enough, for not having a rich husband, for not having the right kind of job, even though my job was more important than anyone in that room knew. It was punishment for just being me, the Isabella they thought they knew, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who was easy to forget. I took a deep breath. The smell of roasted chicken and some kind of fancy fish wafted from the kitchen doors. The clatter continued. The low hum of conversation from the other tables felt miles away. I was in a different world, right there in the same room, my own little island of forgotten things. I smoothed my navy blue dress. It was simple, elegant I thought, but probably too simple for them. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a dull constant throb that had been there for years, a feeling of being overlooked, undervalued, like I was never quite enough for them. This wasn't just a seat by the kitchen. This was a statement, and I understood it perfectly. Emma was marrying into the Wellington family. This wasn't just a marriage, it was an event, a strategic merger that my mother had been dreaming of for years. The Wellingtons were a dynasty. Their name was on buildings, on university wings, on political campaign donations. They had the kind of money that didn't need to be flashy because it was woven into the very fabric of the city. Richard Wellington, my new brother-in-law, was the heir to all of it. He was handsome, charming, and carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. My family was practically dizzy with the glamour of it all. For months our phone calls were dominated by wedding talk. Not about love or happiness, but about venues, guest lists, and most importantly, impressions. The pressure to impress the Wellingtons was immense. It was like our entire family was on probation, and this wedding was the final exam. I remember a conversation with my father a month before the wedding. He was a successful lawyer, a man who prided himself on his sharp suits and his courtroom victories. He sat me down in his study, the room smelling of old books and leather. "Isabella," he started, not looking at me, but at a spot on the wall behind my head. This is a big step for our family. The Wellingtons are a different caliber of people. It's important we all put our best foot forward. Of course, Dad, I said quietly. Your sister has done very well for herself, he continued, as if I wasn't aware. She's found her place. Now, when you're at these events, just try to follow her lead. Let her and your mother do the talking. No need to bring up anything complicated. Just be pleasant. Don't bring up anything complicated. He meant my job. He meant my life. Anything that wasn't about finding a rich husband or planning a party. It wasn't a malicious command. It was worse. It was a dismissal, a gentle pat on the head to the child who wouldn't understand the adult conversation. This role of the invisible daughter wasn't new. It had been cast for me long ago. I remembered my high school graduation. Emma, 2 years older, had graduated with honors, a scholarship to a prestigious art school, and the lead in the school play. Her graduation party was a huge affair. Our backyard was filled with people celebrating her bright shining future. 2 years later, I graduated as valedictorian. I had a full academic scholarship to Georgetown for international relations. My party was a small family barbecue. My parents told everyone I was going to be a government worker. They said it with the same enthusiasm as saying I was going to be a librarian. Steady, safe, unremarkable. When Emma was picking out her wedding dress, she flew to New York with Mom. They spent a weekend in a 5-star hotel going to exclusive bridal boutiques. I wasn't invited. Oh, honey, you'd be bored to tears. Mom had said over the phone. It's all just tulle and lace. Not really your thing. You're more practical. Practical. It was another one of their words for me, like plain and simple. It meant I lacked imagination. It meant I didn't appreciate the finer things. It meant I was a grey crayon in a box of vibrant colors. They sent me photos of Emma in enormous sparkling gowns. She looked radiant. I texted back, she looks so beautiful. Because it was the truth and it was what was expected. No one asked what I thought about the dresses. My opinion on aesthetics was considered irrelevant. My job was the biggest source of their misunderstanding. They knew I worked for the State Department in D.C., but their understanding of it was stuck in a 1950s sitcom. They pictured me in a grey skirt suit typing memos in a beige cubicle. A secretary, maybe. An administrative assistant. They couldn't grasp the scale of it. They couldn't or wouldn't imagine the reality. The reality was that my office wasn't a cubicle. It was a secure facility. The memos I handled were classified documents that outlined foreign policy strategy. The people I coordinated with weren't just office managers. They were ambassadors, foreign ministers, and chiefs of staff or heads of state. I'd spent a frantic 72 hours in Geneva once hammering out the logistics for a last-minute peace talk. I'd stood in the gilded halls of palaces discreetly advising royal aides on protocol. I'd been on tarmacs in the middle of the night ensuring the seamless arrival of Air Force One on foreign soil. My world was one of immense pressure, precision, and consequence. A single mistake in scheduling or protocol could create an international incident. I held a top-secret security clearance. The investigation process had been grueling. Men in dark suits had interviewed my neighbors, my old teachers, my friends. They had dug into every corner of my life. My family found it all very peculiar. It seems a bit much for a government job, doesn't it? My mother had said, a worried frown on her face. All this fuss. I tried to explain it once. We were at Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago. An uncle asked me what I did exactly. I started to talk about my role in coordinating diplomatic visits. So, my father interrupted, with a dismissive wave of his hand, "You're basically a travel agent for important people." The table chuckled. And that was it. The conversation moved on. A travel agent. That's what they heard. My complex, demanding, and vital career had been reduced to booking flights and hotels. I never tried to explain it again. It was easier to let them have their simple picture of me. It was less painful than trying to make them see the real one, only to have them color it over with their own assumptions. Their betrayal wasn't in a single act. It was in 1,000 tiny dismissals. It was in the way their eyes would glaze over when I started to talk about my work. It was in the way they always directed questions about politics or world events to my father, never to me, the person who actually worked in that world. It was in their quiet, constant assumption that my life was a placeholder, a waiting room for a husband and children, which they saw as the real prize. So, when Emma told me my seat was at table 18 because of logistics, I knew the truth. It was a physical manifestation of my place in the family, out of the way, not part of the main picture, the invisible daughter, seated by the noisy kitchen, where no one important would have to look at her. The rehearsal dinner was the beginning of the performance. It was held at the Wellingtons Country Club, a place with sprawling green lawns and a clubhouse that looked more like a mansion. The air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. I felt like I needed a special pass just to breathe it. The Wellington family was there in full force, a polished and intimidating unit. Mrs. Wellington, a woman with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, greeted my mother with air kisses. Mr. Wellington shook my father's hand with a firm, practiced grip. I had spent an hour getting ready, trying to find something in my closet that would meet the unspoken dress code. I settled on a simple, well-cut black sheath dress. It was professional, elegant, and timeless. It was a dress that had served me well at embassy dinners and formal receptions. In my world, it was perfectly appropriate. In their world, it was a mistake. The moment I walked in, my mother's eyes scanned me from head to toe. Her smile, which had been bright and wide for the Wellingtons, tightened into a thin line. She steered me toward a quiet alcove, her fingers digging into my arm. "Isabella," she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. Her eyes darted around the room, making sure no one important could hear her scolding me. "We talked about this. I told you to make an effort." "I did make an effort, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is a classic dress." "It's plain," she said, the word landing like a slap. "Everyone here is dressed for a celebration, and you look like you're heading to a business meeting. At least try not to look plain." Plain. There it was again. Her favorite weapon. It was meant to make me feel small, and it worked. A hot wave of shame washed over me. I felt my shoulders slump. I suddenly wished the dress had more color, a bit of sparkle, anything to make me blend in with the glittering crowd. But it was too late. I was already marked as the drab one, the one who didn't understand. My cousin Jennifer, who was one of Emma's bridesmaids, made sure to twist the knife. She glided over, her dress a vibrant splash of fuchsia, her smile wide and predatory. She looked me up and down, a theatrical gasp escaping her lips. "Oh, Isabella, look at you," she exclaimed, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby guests. They turned, their eyes flicking over my simple black dress, then back to Jennifer's knowing smirk. "You're so brave wearing something so modest." Her words dripped with false admiration. It was a performance for the small audience she had gathered. Brave was her code for out of place. Modest was her code for boring. She was painting me as a pitiable, clueless creature who didn't know the rules of their sophisticated game. The onlookers gave me fleeting, sympathetic smiles before turning away, the judgment already passed. I just stood there, a polite, fixed smile on my face. It was the smile I had perfected over years of these small public humiliations. It was my armor. Inside I was crumbling. I wanted to tell her that my modest dress had been in the same room as 3 world leaders just last month, and no one had called it brave. But what was the point? Her reality was this country club. My reality was a world away. To her, I was just her weird, single cousin who worked a boring government job. The dinner itself was an exercise in endurance. I was seated between a great uncle who kept asking me if I had a boyfriend yet, and one of Richard's cousins, a young man with a trust fund who talked endlessly about his ski trip to Aspen. He asked me what I did for a living. "I work for the State Department," I said. "Oh, cool," he said, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more interesting to talk to. "So, like at the DMV?" I didn't even have the energy to correct him. I just nodded and pushed a piece of asparagus around my plate. Throughout the meal, I felt their pity. It was in the gentle, condescending tone of Mrs. Wellington when she asked, "And what do you do, dear?" It was in the way my own father would rush to answer for me, saying, "She has a nice, stable job in DC, as if he were apologizing for it. It was in the sad smiles from relatives who saw my single status at 31 as a personal tragedy. I remembered a family Christmas from years ago. Emma had just gotten engaged to Richard. Her gift from our parents was a down payment on a condo. It was announced with great fanfare. My gift was a high-end blender for when you finally get your own place and have someone to cook for, my mother had said with a wink. The implication was clear. Emma's life was starting while mine was still on hold waiting for a man to complete it. The blender sat in its box in my apartment, a monument to their limited expectations for me. At the rehearsal dinner, Emma finally came over to me. She looked breathtaking in a white cocktail dress, but her expression was stressed. "Hey," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Jennifer told me what she said. Just ignore her, okay? Don't make a scene." She wasn't defending me. She was managing me. She was worried I would react, that I would embarrass her in front of her new perfect family. She wasn't my sister in that moment. She was a public relations manager handling a potential problem. "I won't," I said quietly. "Good," she said, relieved. She gave my shoulder a quick squeeze and then floated away, back to her fiancé, back to the center of the universe. I sat there feeling the full weight of their perception of me. I was the family's charity case, the quiet, plain, single daughter, the one who needed to be handled, managed, and hidden away. They weren't just neglecting me. They were actively victimizing me with their pity, their backhanded compliments, and their profound inability to see me for who I truly was. And I just took it. I smiled my professional smile and let the pieces of my heart break off one by one. The wedding reception was a masterpiece of social engineering. The main floor was a constellation of beautifully decorated tables, each one a small ecosystem of power and influence. Table 1, the head table, was for the bride and groom and their parents. The tables immediately surrounding it were for the Wellingtons' inner circle, senators, CEOs, and people with last names that were also the names of famous brands. My family, aunts, uncles, cousins, were seated a bit further out, still in the glow of the main event, but clearly in a supporting role. And then there was table 18, my table. It wasn't just by the kitchen, it was in a different zip code, tucked into a far corner, partially obscured by a large potted fern and a decorative screen. It was the land of misfit toys. I sat down and surveyed my fellow outcasts. There was my great-aunt Carol, who was in her late 80s and had already asked me 3 times if I was Emma. There were 2 distant cousins from my dad's side, a painfully shy couple who seemed to be communicating entirely through nervous glances. And there was a young man I didn't recognize, who introduced himself as a 3rd cousin of Richard's, a student at a local community college. He seemed just as bewildered to be there as I was. We were the seating chart's loose ends, neatly tied up and tucked away. The celebration began, and the feeling of isolation became a physical thing. The music from the live band reached us as a muffled throb, the bass line vibrating through the floor, but the melody lost in the distance. The laughter from the main table sounded like the roar of a faraway ocean. Waiters using the path next to our table as a main thoroughfare constantly rushed past, their faces set in grim concentration. The swinging kitchen doors provided a percussive soundtrack of clanging plates and shouted orders, a constant reminder of the machinery working behind the beautiful facade. A cold draft washed over us every time the doors opened, carrying the scent of dish soap and hot grease. I tried to make conversation. I asked Aunt Carol about her garden. She told me about her prize-winning roses for 10 minutes before asking again if I was the one getting married. The shy cousins offered one-word answers to my questions. The student cousin was busy texting under the table. The silence at our table was a stark contrast to the vibrant energy filling the rest of the room. We were spectators, not participants. The toasts began, and I felt, Clear's throat, a knot tighten in my stomach. I watched my father stand up, his chest puffed out with pride. He spoke eloquently about Emma, his shining star, his beautiful, brilliant daughter. He told a funny story about her as a child, and the room erupted in warm laughter. He welcomed Richard into the family, calling him the son he never had. His gaze swept across the room, but it passed right over my corner as if it were empty space. He never mentioned his other daughter, not once. I sat perfectly still, my hands clenched in my lap, my face a mask of polite interest. Inside, it felt like a door had been quietly shut on me. I let my mind drift, playing the painful what-if game. I watched my mother chatting animatedly with Mrs. Wellington, their heads close together, sharing a laugh. They looked like old friends, like they belonged to the same exclusive club. I imagined the life they were all a part of, a life of weekend trips to the Hamptons, charity balls, and effortless influence, a life where I had no place. At one point, I got up to use the restroom, navigating the maze of tables. I passed a table where my cousin Jennifer was holding court with our other cousins. They were laughing hysterically at a story she was telling. As I walked past, Jennifer saw me. Her smile faltered for a second. "Oh, hey, Isabella," she said, her tone flat. "Hi, everyone," I said, trying to sound cheerful. They all murmured hello, their eyes flicking away from me, eager to get back to their conversation. No one asked me to join them. No one made space for me. It was a clear, unspoken signal. You are not part of this circle. I walked away, the sound of their renewed laughter following me like a cold shadow. It was a small thing, a tiny interaction, but it felt like 1,000 paper cuts. It was the act of rejection that hurt so much more than the passive neglect of the seating chart. The experience reminded me of a work event I had attended just a few months earlier. It was a gala at the French embassy. The ambassador himself had greeted me at the door. I had spent the evening in conversation with diplomats and attachés, discussing trade policy and global security. People listened when I spoke. They asked for my opinion. They treated me with respect. I was valued. I was seen. The contrast between that night and this one was so stark, it made me dizzy. In that world, I was a respected professional. In this world, my own family's world, I was nothing. The final blow came with Jennifer's toast. She stood up, champagne glass in hand, looking like the cat who had caught the canary. She toasted Emma and Richard, gushing about how perfect they were for each other. Then her eyes found me in my corner. I knew it was coming. I braced myself. Some people, she said, her voice laced with fake sympathy, take a little longer to find their purpose, to figure out where they belong. But that's okay. She gave a tinkling little laugh. We love them anyway, right? A wave of polite, unthinking laughter went through the room. A few people glanced in my direction. Their faces a mixture of pity and mild amusement. They thought it was a harmless joke, but I knew it was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in the poison of her own insecurity and designed to wound me publicly. I didn't react. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, my throat tight. I held my head high and stared straight ahead, focusing on a floral arrangement on a distant table. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I would not let them see they had broken me. But beneath the calm exterior, the isolation was complete. I was adrift on a lonely island in a sea of my own family, and the water was rising. The wedding cake was cut. The first dance was danced. The party had moved into a phase of loud music and energetic dancing. From my vantage point at table 18, it was a swirling vortex of expensive dresses and dark suits. I felt a profound weariness settle over me, a soul-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. I had smiled until my face ached. I had endured the pity and the insults. I had been made to feel utterly and completely alone. I was done. I decided I would leave. I wouldn't make a big announcement. I would just slip out. A ghost leaving a party she was never really invited to. No one would even notice I was gone until the next morning, if even then. It was a sad thought, but it was also a relief. I could go back to my hotel room, take off this dress, wash the polite smile off my face, and just be myself. I could be the person who was respected, the person who had a purpose, even if her own family couldn't see it. I reached into my small black clutch, my fingers searching for my hotel key card. As I did, my other phone, the secure one, vibrated against my hand. It wasn't a normal gentle buzz. It was a sharp insistent pulse, a specific pattern I knew by heart. It was the summons. It was the signal that my other life, my real life, was calling. In an instant, everything shifted. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. My training took over, pushing aside the hurt and the humiliation. The hurt daughter receded, and the senior diplomatic liaison took her place. This was my world. This was where I had control. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. Aunt Carol was now sound asleep in her chair, a gentle snore escaping her lips. The shy cousins were staring at their plates. No one noticed me leave the table. I walked away from the noise of the kitchen, finding a relatively quiet spot in a wide hallway that led to the restrooms. It was dimly lit, away from the main flow of guests. I took the phone out of my clutch. The screen was dark, showing only the secure encrypted icon. I answered it, holding it close to my ear. "Carter," I said, my voice low and steady. "Miss Carter," the voice on the other end replied. It was Mark, one of the best agents on my team. His voice was a familiar island of calm professionalism. "Apologies for the intrusion. Your guest is 10 minutes out. ET is now 7 minutes. Traffic is clear." My heart gave a single hard thump. Against my ribs. My guest, Her Royal Highness Princess Amora of Kenyana. She was actually coming. A memory flashed in my mind. 3 months ago, I was in a tense 3-day negotiation in Brussels. The trade deal was falling apart. Princess Amora, representing her country, was frustrated and ready to walk away. I found a small overlooked clause in the treaty, a protocol from a century ago that gave her the leverage she needed. It was a long shot, but it worked. The deal was saved. Later that evening, she had found me in the hotel lobby. "Isabella," she had said, her usually formal demeanor replaced by genuine warmth. "You did more for my country in 3 hours than my last 3 ministers did in 3 years. I am in your debt." "It's my job, Your Highness," I'd replied. "Nonsense," she'd insisted. "If you ever need anything, you ask. I mean it." On a whim, feeling disconnected from my own family drama unfolding back home over wedding plans, I had said, "Well, my sister is getting married in a few months. It would be an honor if you could come." I said it as a half-joke, a fantasy. I never, ever thought she would say yes, but she had smiled, a brilliant, genuine smile. "Send me the details. I would not miss it." And now she was 7 minutes away. "Understood," I said to Mark, my mind snapping back to the present. Confirmed arrival time. Standard protocol. No announcements. I'll meet them at the entrance. Copy that, Ms. Carter. Her security team is already in position on the perimeter, Mark confirmed. Thank you, Mark. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my clutch. My breaking point had arrived, but it wasn't one of tears or despair. It was a moment of absolute clarity. For the last 48 hours, I had allowed these people to define me. I had allowed their narrow, petty world to shrink mine. No more. I walked back towards the ballroom, my posture different. My head was held high. My steps were purposeful. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was on duty. I spotted the venue coordinator, a stressed-looking man named David, directing staff near the main entrance. I intercepted him, my approach direct but not aggressive. "David," I said, my voice calm but carrying an authority that made him stop and turn his full attention to me. "Yes, Is everything all right?" he asked, his eyes already darting around the room. "In approximately 5 minutes, a motorcade will arrive," I began, keeping my voice low. "It will include a security detail. They will be escorting a high-profile international guest." He frowned, confused. I don't have anyone like that on my list. All the VIPs are accounted for." He gestured vaguely toward the front tables. "We weren't informed." "You weren't informed because this is a private visit," I cut in smoothly, not allowing him to argue. "Your security should stand down and allow the incoming detail to do their job. They will be discreet. There is to be no announcement. No fanfare. You will simply ensure the path from the entrance is clear. Am I understood?" He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. For the first time, He was really looking at me, not as the forgotten guest from table 18, but as someone who was clearly in command. The professional diplomat had taken over, and my voice carried the weight of countless high-stakes situations. "But, who is it?" he stammered. "Who are you?" A small, genuine smile touched my lips. The pain and humiliation of the evening seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet, thrilling sense of anticipation. The power dynamic of the entire event was about to be turned upside down. "You'll see," I told him. I turned from him and walked back toward my lonely table in the corner. The clatter from the kitchen, the muffled music, the distant laughter, it was all just background noise now. I looked across the room at my family. My mother, laughing with Mrs. Wellington, my father, talking politics with a congressman, my sister, the beautiful princess of the ball. They were all so happy in their perfect little world. They had no idea it was about to be visited by actual royalty, and they had no idea that their invisible daughter, the one they had hidden by the kitchen, was the one who held the key. I walked back to my table with a composure I didn't know I possessed. The 5 minutes before her arrival felt like the longest 5 minutes of my life. I sat down in my designated chair, the one by the clattering kitchen doors, and simply waited. My heart was a steady, heavy drum against my ribs. It wasn't a heart beating with fear or anxiety, but with the rhythmic certainty of a clock tower, counting down to a moment that would change everything. I folded my hands in my lap and watched the room. It was like seeing it all for the first time, not as a wounded participant, but as a strategic observer. I saw my mother, her head tilted just so, laughing at something Mr. Wellington said. She was performing. She was playing the part of the proud mother-in-law to a powerful family, and she was playing it well. My father was locked in a conversation with a local congressman, gesturing with his wine glass, looking important, and Emma? She was on the dance floor with Richard, her head on his shoulder, a look of pure, unadulterated bliss on her face. She was the sun, and everyone else was a planet revolving around her. They were all so perfectly in their element, so secure in their roles and in the social order of the room. A strange sadness washed over me. They had no idea. Then I saw the first sign. Through the grand ballroom windows, I saw the sweep of headlights. One set, then two, then a third. They were sleek, black, and moved synchronized precision that was anything but ordinary. A few guests near the windows paused their conversations, their curiosity piqued. The venue coordinator, David, was standing near the entrance, wringing his hands. He saw the lights, too, and his face went pale. He gave me a single, panicked look across the expanse of the room. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. The music, a loud pop song the band was playing, seemed to falter. The lead singer must have seen the commotion outside. The volume dipped, the beat stuttering for a moment before fading out into an awkward silence. The low hum of 100 private conversations died down, replaced by a wave of confused murmuring. Heads began to turn towards the entrance. What was happening? Was there an emergency? The first to enter were two men. They were not dressed like wedding guests. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits with earpieces that were just barely visible. Their eyes scanned the room with a calm, sweeping efficiency that was unnerving. They took up positions on either side of the grand doorway, their posture still but radiating an intense energy. They were Secret Service, or more accurately, the Royal Protection Squad. I knew their detail leader, a good man named Alistair. The room was now almost completely silent. A fork clattered against a plate somewhere, the sound echoing in the stillness. My father stopped his conversation, a frown of irritation on his face. My mother looked over, confused by the interruption. Emma and Richard had stopped dancing and were staring at the entrance like everyone else. A sleek black Rolls-Royce had pulled up to the curb, its engine a barely audible purr. A driver in a crisp uniform got out and opened the rear passenger door. For a moment, nothing happened. The suspense in the room was a tangible thing, thick and heavy. Then, she stepped out. Her Royal Highness Princess Amora of Kenyatta moved with a grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics. She wasn't just walking, she was gliding. She wore a gown of deep emerald green silk that shimmered under the ballroom lights. It was elegant, simple, and yet it made every other dress in the room look like a cheap imitation. A delicate diamond tiara was nestled in her dark, upswept hair, catching the light and scattering it in 1,000 tiny, brilliant specks. She was beauty, yes, but more than that, she was power. It was in the calm authority of her gaze, the set of her shoulders, the unhurried pace of her movements. This was a woman who was used to commanding entire rooms, entire nations, without ever raising her voice. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Whispers erupted, spreading like fire. Who is that? Is she a celebrity? Look at that tiara. Is it real? She must be a friend of the Wellingtons. I watched Mr. and Mrs. Wellington. Their faces were a mask of utter confusion. They were the hosts of this power gathering, and they clearly had no idea who this impossibly regal woman was. They exchanged a look of barely concealed panic. This was an unscheduled variable, and the Wellingtons did not like variables. My own family was just as stunned. My father was squinting, as if trying to place her from a news report. My mother's hand was at her throat, her eyes wide. I saw Emma whisper something to Richard, who just shook his head, his face blank with shock. Princess Amora paused for a moment at the entrance, her eyes sweeping across the room. She was not looking for the head table. She was not looking for the most important people. Her eyes moved past the politicians, past the CEOs, past the Wellingtons, past my own parents. Her gaze scanned the room, and then it found me. It found me at table 18, in the corner, by the kitchen, and she smiled. A genuine, warm, brilliant smile that transformed her regal face into one of pure, unadulterated friendship. The room froze. Everyone followed her line of sight. 100 pairs of eyes, 100 confused expressions, all landed on the forgotten corner of the room. They landed on the floral screen. They landed on the clattering kitchen doors. They landed on the plain girl in the simple navy dress. They landed on me. Then she began to walk. She didn't walk towards the head table to greet the bride and groom. She didn't walk towards the Wellingtons to pay her respects. She crossed the vast, polished floor of the ballroom in a direct, unwavering line, straight toward me. The silence was now absolute. The only sound was the soft rustle of her silk gown and the quiet, rhythmic click of her heels on the marble. With every step she took, the power in the room shifted. It was like watching a magnetic field realign, iron filings snapping into a new unbelievable pattern. The center of the universe was no longer the head table. The center of the universe was table 18. She reached my table and stopped. She smelled faintly of jasmine. She looked down at me, her dark eyes sparkling with amusement and genuine affection. The entire wedding, my entire family held its breath. "Isabella," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the silent room. She leaned down and kissed me on both cheeks, a familiar European gesture that seemed impossibly intimate in this context. "You didn't think I'd miss your sister's wedding, did you?" The world seemed to stop for a second. The sound of Princess Amora's voice, so warm and familiar to me, echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. My name, Isabella, spoken with such affection by this impossibly elegant woman, hung in the air like a question everyone was desperately trying to answer. I stood up, my movements feeling slow and deliberate, as if I were moving through water. "Your Highness," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I'm so honored you could make it. I know how demanding your schedule is." "Nonsense." She waved a hand dismissively, though her smile remained. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I promised you, didn't I?" Her eyes scanned our little table of outcasts. She gave a polite, regal nod to my sleeping great-aunt Carol and the bewildered-looking cousins. Then she looked at the empty chair beside me, the one that had remained vacant all night. It was a simple banquet hall chair, no different from any other, but in that moment, it looked like a throne waiting to be claimed. Without a word, one of her security detail materialized beside her, pulling the chair out. Princess Amora sat down, right there, at table 18, next to me, by the kitchen. If the room had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. The shock was so profound it was almost comical. I could feel hundreds of eyes burning into the back of my head. I could practically hear the gears grinding in people's minds as they tried to process what was happening. A princess, a real honest-to-God princess, was sitting at the worst table in the room next to the invisible daughter no one had paid attention to all night. Princess Amora smoothed her emerald gown, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shockwave she had just sent through the room. She looked past me toward the swinging doors of the kitchen, which at that very moment clattered open as a flustered busboy rushed out. She leaned in toward me, a mischievous twinkle in her eye, and said in a low conspiratorial whisper, "The view of the kitchen is quite charming. So much action." I couldn't help it. A small genuine laugh escaped my lips. It was the first real happy sound I had made all night. Then she straightened up. She raised her voice slightly, just enough for the surrounding tables, and certainly the head table, to hear her clearly. Her tone was light, conversational, but her words were precision-guided missiles. "It's a curious custom you have here in America," she said, looking around with an air of polite anthropological interest. "In my country, we seat honored guests and trusted diplomatic advisors close to the family. It's a sign of respect, you see. Proximity is power." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I do so love learning about new traditions." That was it. The quiet revenge. It wasn't an accusation, it wasn't a demand, it was a simple observation delivered with the unimpeachable authority of royalty, and it laid bare the profound social blunder my family had made. She had, in 2 sentences, turned their seating chart from a matter of logistics into a declaration of disrespect. I dared to look over at my family. My mother's smile was gone. It had not just faded, it had collapsed. Her face was a mask of pale, horrified shock. Her mouth was slightly open, and her eyes were fixed on the princess, then on me, then back again. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind her eyes as she tried to understand a situation that was completely outside her realm of experience. My father had gone rigid. His face, usually ruddy and confident, was ashen. He was staring at me, really staring at me for the first time all night. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something far more devastating, utter bottomless confusion. He looked like a man who had just discovered the world was not flat. Richard, the handsome groom, had gone pale. He kept glancing at his own father, who looked furious. This was not part of the plan. This was a disruption to the perfect, controlled event they had orchestrated. A princess was supposed to be at their table, a jewel in their social crown. She was not supposed to be sitting in the corner with the boring sister-in-law and Emma. My sister looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face was a kaleidoscope of emotions, disbelief, shock, and the slow dawning horror of realization. Her perfect wedding, her perfect day, had just been hijacked, and the hijacker was me. Phones, which had been subtly raised before, were now out in the open. Guests were no longer pretending not to be interested. They were openly staring, whispering, and taking pictures. The narrative of the evening had changed. The story was no longer Emma Carter's marriage into the Wellington dynasty. The story was now the mysterious princess who showed up for the quiet sister. A waiter, trembling slightly, approached our table. He didn't know what to do. Your Highness," he stammered. Can I get you something? Champagne." "That would be lovely," Amora said, giving him a warm smile that seemed to momentarily short-circuit his brain. "And a glass for my friend Isabella as well. We have much to celebrate." As the waiter scurried away, I looked at Princess Amora. I felt a wave of gratitude so immense it almost brought tears to my eyes. She had done more for me in 10 minutes than my family had done in a lifetime. She had not just seen me, she had made everyone else see me, too. She caught my eye and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. In that moment, sitting at the worst table in the room, I had never felt more powerful. The seat hadn't changed, but by her sitting in it, everything else had. The kitchen doors could have been the gates to a palace. The floral screen could have been a royal tapestry. For the first time, I wasn't an outcast in a borrowed world. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and the rest of the world was finally catching up. The spell of silence couldn't last forever. It was broken by the slow, deliberate footsteps of Mr. Wellington Sr. He was a man accustomed to being the gravitational center of any room, and he was now walking toward a new center of power, a look of grim determination on his face. He was flanked by my father, who looked like he was being marched to his own execution. They approached table 18 as if it were a foreign territory, their movements stiff and uncertain. "Your Highness," Mr. Wellington began, his voice a low rumble. He executed a short, awkward bow that was clearly unrehearsed. "I am Charles Wellington. On behalf of both our families, I must apologize. There has been a terrible misunderstanding with the seating arrangements." My father just stood beside him, nodding dumbly, his face blotchy and red. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Princess Amora looked up at them, her expression one of polite curiosity. She did not stand. She did not invite them to sit. She held all the power and she knew it. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice as smooth as silk. "I don't think so. I am exactly where I intended to be, with my dear friend Isabella." She placed a hand gently on my arm. The simple gesture was an anchor, a public declaration of allegiance. Mr. Wellington's eyes flickered down to her hand, then back up to my face. The confusion in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning, horrified respect. He was a man who understood power, and he was starting to understand that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation about the quiet woman in the navy dress. "Your friend." My father finally managed to choke out, the words sounding foreign and strange. He looked at me as if I were a complete stranger, as if I had sprouted wings. "Of course," Amora said, her gaze turning to him. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a cool appraising look. "Surely you know what your own daughter does, the vital work she performs." My father faltered. "Well, yes, of course, she has a very important government job," he mumbled, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "We've always been very proud. We respect her privacy. She's very modest about her accomplishments." It was a pathetic attempt to save face, and Princess Amora saw right through it. She tilted her head, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "Modest, perhaps, or perhaps she is just accustomed to not being asked." The words landed like a physical blow. My father visibly flinched. Amora then turned her attention to the room at large, which was still hanging on her every word. She raised her voice just enough to carry, her tone changing from conversational to declarative. "For those of you who are unaware," she began, "Isabella Carter is not just a government worker. She runs the entire diplomatic coordination for visiting heads of state for the U.S. State Department." A wave of murmurs rippled through the ballroom. I could see people turning to each other, their eyebrows raised in surprise. "She is the woman who ensures that the delicate dance of international relations runs smoothly," Amora continued, her voice gaining strength. "When your leaders meet, when treaties are negotiated, when global crises are averted, it is often because of the silent, tireless work of people like Isabella. She has been instrumental in multiple global negotiations. There was a critical energy treaty in Geneva that was about to collapse, threatening stability in my entire region. It was Isabella, working for 36 hours straight, who found the solution. I trust her judgment. More than I trust most of my own ministers." My mother, who had been slowly making her way over, froze in place. Her wine glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. No one moved to clean it up. She just stared, her face a mess of shame and disbelief. The exposure was absolute. The simple, plain picture they had painted of me was being publicly, systematically, and completely erased. In its place was a portrait of a woman of substance, of importance, of global consequence. And it was being painted by a princess. Finally, Emma arrived. She pushed her way through the small crowd that had gathered, her white dress looking like a surrender flag. Richard was right behind her, his face grim. She stopped in front of me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Isabella," she whispered, her voice cracking. I had no idea." She looked from me to the princess and back again. "You never told us. You never told us any of this." It was the ultimate accusation, the final attempt to shift the blame. "You hid this from us." I looked at my sister, the princess of the ball, the center of my family's universe. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt a deep, profound sadness for what we had lost, for what we never had. I kept my voice soft, so only she could hear it. But the words were the heaviest I had ever spoken. "You never asked," I replied. The truth of it hit her. It was so simple, so undeniable. Her face crumpled. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the raw guilt that was now plain for everyone to see. She hadn't asked. My father hadn't asked. My mother hadn't asked. They were so busy building their own version of me, the quiet, unremarkable one, that they never bothered to look at the real thing. The shift in the room was complete. I was no longer the outcast. I was the enigma. My cousin Jennifer was staring at her shoes, her face bright red. The Wellingtons were in damage control mode, trying to whisper apologies, and my family was broken. Their comfortable illusions shattered on the ballroom floor right next to my mother's wine glass. The truth was out, and I hadn't had to say a thing. The air in the ballroom had become thick and suffocating. The party was still technically happening. The band had started playing a soft, uncertain melody, but the energy was gone. The atmosphere was charged with whispers, stares, and the palpable awkwardness of a social order that had been turned completely upside down. Every eye in the room seemed to be on me, trying to reconcile the woman they had ignored all night with the one a princess called her trusted friend. Princess Amora must have sensed my discomfort. She leaned over and whispered, "It's a beautiful evening. Shall we get some fresh air?" I nodded, grateful for the escape. "Yes, please." She stood, and the room seemed to hold its breath again. She gave a polite, dismissive nod to the stunned Wellingtons and my shell-shocked parents. "If you'll excuse us," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She placed a light hand on the small of my back, and together, we walked away from table 18. We moved through the crowd of onlookers like a ship parting the sea. No one spoke to us. No one dared to get in our way. We walked through a set of French doors and out onto a wide stone terrace that overlooked the country club's manicured gardens. The cool night air was a relief. It was quiet out here. The sounds of the party now a distant, muffled beat. The sky was clear, dotted with a million tiny stars. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, fresh air. It felt like the first real breath I had taken all day. "Are you all right, Isabella?" Amora asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. "I am now," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you, Amora. You have no idea what you did for me tonight." "I think I do," she replied, her eyes kind. She picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a tray a passing waiter had left on the terrace railing. She handed one to me. "I have found," she said, her voice thoughtful, "that people who are truly powerful rarely feel the need to announce it. It is the insecure who puff out their chests and demand attention. You are one of the quiet ones, Isabella. The ones who simply do the work. The ones who hold the world together while others take the credit." She raised her glass. "So, a toast to the quiet ones." "To the quiet ones," I repeated, my voice thick with emotion. We clinked our glasses together, the delicate crystal sound a perfect counterpoint to the chaos inside. We stood there for a while in comfortable silence, sipping our champagne and looking out at the dark gardens. The wind felt clean. For the first time in years, maybe my entire life, my heart felt light. The weight of their expectations, their judgments, their pity, it was all gone. It hadn't been lifted by their approval, which I still didn't have. It had been lifted by the realization that I didn't need it. I had never needed it. My worth wasn't something they could grant or take away. It was inherent. It was mine. The peace was broken by the sound of the French doors sliding open. It was Emma. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and her perfect white dress looked rumpled. She saw me and rushed over, her movements frantic. "Isabella," she sobbed, her voice thick and desperate. "Isabella, I am so sorry." She tried to grab my hands, but I kept them wrapped around my champagne glass. Princess Amora, with the exquisite discretion of a true diplomat, took a step back, giving us the illusion of privacy while remaining a silent, supportive presence nearby. "I'm sorry," Emma repeated, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I was horrible. We were all horrible. I had no idea. I feel like the biggest fool in the entire world. The Wellingtons, everyone is staring. Please, Isabella, you have to forgive me. Please. I listened to her words. It was an apology, yes, but it was tangled up in her own panic, her own social shame. She was sorry, but she was also sorry that her wedding had been upended, that she had been embarrassed in front of her new powerful family. The apology wasn't clean. It wasn't just for me, and in that moment, I realized I didn't need it to be. I didn't need a perfect apology from her. I didn't need her to fully understand the depth of the hurt she had caused over decades of casual neglect. Demanding that from her would only keep me tied to that pain, waiting for something she might never be capable of giving. I looked at my sister, at this crying, panicked woman who had shared my childhood but had never really known me, and I felt a release. I forgive you, Emma, I said, and my voice was calm and clear. The words were true. I forgave her for my own sake. I was letting go of the anger, the resentment, the years of accumulated hurt. I was setting myself free. A look of immense relief washed over her face. Oh, thank you, Isabella. Thank you. We can fix this. I'll move your seat. I'll have Dad make an announcement. No, I interrupted gently but firmly. The forgiveness was one thing. The future was another. The forgiving part is for me, Emma. It's so I don't have to carry this anymore. But there's something you need to understand. I took a deep breath, holding her gaze. This was the most important part. I will love you because you are my sister, I said, but I won't ever sit at a table where I'm treated like a burden again. I will not make myself small to make others comfortable. That part of my life is over. I was setting a boundary, not a wall, but a clear, healthy line. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a simple statement of my own value. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She didn't understand, not really, but she would eventually. Or she wouldn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I understood. I finished my champagne and placed the empty glass on railing. I gave her one last sad smile. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't need to win the argument. There was no scene. There was no bitterness. There was just peace. I walked back toward Princess Amora, who was waiting for me with a small knowing smile. I believe my work here is done, she said softly. Shall we? Yes, I said, my heart feeling lighter than it had in my entire life. Let's go. Together, we walked away from the terrace, leaving my sister, her ruined wedding, and my old life behind. The week after the wedding was a blur of phone calls, apologies from my parents rambling and incoherent, an invitation to brunch from the Wellingtons, which I politely declined. I didn't need their validation now that the tide had turned. I was done with their games. The story of the princess at the wedding became a minor legend in DC social circles, but my life, my real life, moved on. The next month I was promoted. The promotion had been in the works for a while, but the timing felt like fate. I was now the Deputy Director of Protocol Affairs. My name, Isabella Carter, started appearing on official government briefings and diplomatic dispatches. The Wellington name, once so important and imposing, seemed to fade from the headlines. Their power was built on guest lists and appearances. Mine was built on something real. A few months later, I agreed to be part of a feature on women in diplomacy. During the interview, the journalist asked me about a rumor she'd heard about a family wedding and a royal guest. I just smiled. They seated me by the kitchen, I said, the memory no longer holding any pain, only irony. Turns out, the best seat in the room was my own. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small by the very people who should have built you up, drop your city in the comments. Like this video and subscribe for more stories where silence finally turns into strength, because sometimes dignity is the loudest revenge.